There's no place in this industry where you work more hours, like more energy, like demanding than at an airline. I'm sure of that.
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Miller with Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, Garrick Deschavant of Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who are we talking to today?
Today, we are speaking with Priscilla Branco. She is currently the SVP of SVP Marketing for Macquarie Air Finance, and she has a focus with Latin America. She was also a consultant at Allegiant Air for a while. She was the regional manager and SVP commercial for Latin America and Caribbean for GCAS. She also worked for Azul Airlines as the fleet director and head of aircraft programs. And she started her career. She was an associate at I'm going to mispronounce this, but it looks like Bosch and Rame Lawfirm. So she has a law degree from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. She has a business MBA degree from Dom Cabral University with post MBA in marketing at Kellogg School of Management and Northwestern. Look, she's got the experience. It's going to be a lot of fun. So can't wait to kind of talk to her and get her take on what's going on, south of us. So Priscilla, this is your time on wing.
Just a quick intermission before we continue with the show. We do get a lot of questions about how our listeners can support the show, and frankly, the easiest way is to continue the spirit of the show, which is just to reach out to us at conferences. But we also run businesses as well, and you can support us by supporting a lot of the work that we do. You can support the work that I do through Visual Approach by visiting visualapproach.io, where we produce a lot of research and analysis, a lot of data visualizations.
From my side, obviously, I focus more on metals, so anything that's aircraft related, if you're looking for valuations, whether it's on aircraft engines, I'm happy to help with any of those types of projects. So we appreciate certainly the opportunities to work with all of you. And we certainly also appreciate just the fact that people are willing to listen to what we have to say and enjoy kind of our thoughts and takes on what we think is a fascinating industry. So thank you.
Okay, back to the show.
Well, Priscilla, thank you very much for being on Time on Wing with us today. It's a great pleasure to have you on. As you well know from all of our guests, I typically like to ask kind of how you got your start. Where did the passion in aviation come from? So we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, no, thanks, Garrick. Thanks, Courtney. I'm actually an avid listener of the podcast, so I'm very pleased to be here.
So you're the one. Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm the one in Latin America, or maybe even the one in Brazil. I don't know, but
those Brazilian downloads, they're going crazy. I love it.
I do hope, and I mean well by saying this, I do hope that after this, more people from the region can, say, oh, wow, there's an awesome podcast with like two great kind of Canadian guys. Like, I know one of you is French Canadian, but, on the podcast. Nice. And, no, but look, I do listen, and as actually we're briefly talking about it, I think, I'm sure actually I'm the third woman in the podcast, after Ashley and Pam. And I'm very proud of that. And, hopefully we can bring like more women in aviation in general. And we can definitely going to talk about that in the podcast right now, but in this podcast as well. So answering your question about how I came by, honestly, it was totally by chance. I would never envisioned, to be where I am today, like 20 years in the making. But, I'm a lawyer by training. And I worked with this very prestigious law firm in Brazil called Bosch and Rame. And Bosch and Rame, when I joined in January 2004, I was pretty much getting out of law school. And Bosch and Rame represented back in those days, and still does today, maybe even more, I'd say 70% of, the lessors and financiers that either lease or finance aircraft in Brazil. Okay. And if you remember, in June of 2005, Varig entered, their restructure. It was the equivalent of Chapter 11, the closest at that time. It was a new law at the time in Brazil. And they used it and they filed it in the very end of June of 2005. And Varig in those days had, 777s, MD-11s, 767s, 757s. The fleet was like 150 aircraft. They flew everywhere, like Europe, Japan, US, lots of 737s, classics and, everything you can imagine in terms of what was the most modern, I would say, aircraft type at the time, Varig had. And as I said, the firm represented lots of lessors and financiers. Actually, at the time, funny enough, I worked more in the oil and gas, maritime type of structured financing transactions. I'm from Rio. I live in Brazil. I'm here in São Paulo now for incredible 15 years. And we'll talk about why I came to São Paulo. It was because of Azul. But I'm from Rio, born and raised. And I used to work at the firm in Rio. And Varig had its main headquarters in Rio. So I remember it was like a Friday, and I'm walking, coming out of, courts and stuff. And then, a partner calls me, Priscilla, are you still at the courthouse? I said, yeah, I'm actually coming out. No, go back. And try to figure out, because, there's, Varig just filed, an injunction and a major lawsuit, and, all our customers, you need to understand what's going on. From that day onwards, I was totally immersed in that process. And my, practice, started shifting from, oil and gas to aviation. And at the time, again, just to name a few names that did not exist anymore, ILFC, the firm represented ILFC, AWAS, CIT, Garrick, I think rings a bell for you, and all those, lessors, all of a sudden, it's what does that mean, right? And, repossessions and, lawsuits and, and the process went on for till 2006, 2007, and 2008. And, Gold, if you guys remember, Gold ended up acquiring, what was a little bit of left of that airline and tried to do international flights, it didn't go that well. They kind of reversed back to the model. But, that's pretty much, I think I would have to thank a very difficult situation in our industry for me to, stepping up into aviation. From then on, started doing a lot of transactions, with at least TAM. It wasn't even LATAM at the time, TAM, Gold, Webjet. I can start naming airlines that do not exist anymore. But anyways.
So Webjet became Avianca Brazil, right?
Their aircraft went places, right? Actually, Gold incorporated in the very end Webjet. There was a lot of restructurings happening in Webjet throughout the years, right? Because they flew 737s. So TAM, again, LATAM, and their BRA, again, another one that does not exist anymore. But, I think, look, it's that kind of was the jumpstart for me. But then from then on, there, in aviation, there's this deconstruction. I think at that time was unfortunately a deconstruction, I could call it this way, but there's a lot of gladly airlines starting up every time now and then, and there's lots of opportunities in this industry. And because I started working again representing lessors and financiers on the other side of the table, one could say, to airlines, I did see the very beginning of Azul, and I did work in pretty much I would say 90% of the leases and transactions, and even debt related transactions for Azul. Early in the days when Azul began in 2008, because Azul started flying in December of 2008, but you do have to bring your aircraft before you begin flying, right? So from 2008, and then that kind of precipitated me joining them. I definitely have to thank, and Renato Covello. I'll say a few names as I go by, but one thing I'll say, throughout my professional trajectory, everywhere I went. One of the things that mattered most for me was the people I was going to be working with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, all of the decisions definitely, and from us, even from the firm, I'm still great friends with, a lot of people, especially Ken Bash, from Bash and Bramet, but, other people in the firm. It was all the same. Renato was the one that, took me there initially to, work in the legal department. He's now the chief people officer at Avianca, is still one of my great friends. And eventually then when I left Azul to go to GCAS as well, Declan Kelly was the one that took me there, and I looked up to him a lot, and other people at GCAS as well. And then I could say the same, when I worked with Legion, with BJ, who's a dear friend, but, I did that because I wanted to work with him. I said, look, I just definitely would click, we think alike, this is going to be great. And then joining Macquarie the same way, working, I knew at the time, John William, who retired, but then Liam Kavanagh, who's my boss. I think throughout, one's journey, yes, there is the challenges that drove me as well, the work related to it, but, definitely, I think the most important thing was, who I'm going to be working with. This is going to, be great. I'm going to learn from them. I'm going to have good chemistry. Not always turns out the way necessarily you envisioned, but, all the time, but I think that's definitely very important, if not the most important driver for me, at least, when I choose or when I decide, look, what I'm going to do next, right?
So one of the names, several of the names, of course we know, but there's a name that keeps coming up. Like when I'm at conferences, just talking with random people, the name BJ Neal comes up a lot, and he kind of flies under the radar a little bit. Of course, he does a lot of work, but everybody says the same thing. He's such a great guy, right? Like he's one of the great guys to.
We should bring him to the
work
podcast. I'll definitely ping him and say, BJ, you should come to the podcast. I'm sure he's going to be great. But about BJ, not only great character, great individual, but one of the brightest person, like people in this industry. Very young age and humble, very bright, and he does integrate his team. I had again the pleasure to work with him and his team. He's just like for more CFOs like Vijay, in the industry, definitely bright, humble, great person to work with.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, I want to know what it was like to go from a big law firm to a startup airline. Kind of culturally, just the idea of the job and the hours put in and just kind of what that was like.
I'll tell you one thing to begin with, and I say this to a lot of friends that I still have in the airline industry, and for as much as I love working at leasing, but one thing I do believe is that there is no place in this industry where you work more hours, like more energy, like demanding than at an airline. I'm sure of that, and that not necessarily don't mean that negatively at all. It's just it's so dynamic, and especially at a startup for sure. But it's so dynamic, so multidisciplinary. It's just 24 hours is never enough for what you can do at an airline. So definitely joining Azul at that time was amazing. It was the best school one could have. For sure, a big crash course one I would say as well, because I think in 10 years, I spent 10 years at Azul. My 10 years at Azul, not a single year was ever the same as the previous year. There was always ever changing or ever evolving or new projects or new ideas, new things to conquer, new things to implement or to adapt from, crisis in Brazil. I'm not even going to talk about COVID. I was out of Azul at the time of COVID, but, there's ever, another saying I will say, there's never a dull moment in Latin America for sure in this industry. So there's ever something happening, even, at the local level, elections happening and, regulatory changes. Look what's happening in Argentina right now. Regulatory changes happening, and that drives, a change, how you have to manage your business. Or there is some macroeconomic, financial crisis that affects that specific country that, affects. And it tends, unfortunately, the reality is you do perhaps see, bigger chances of that happening in Latin America than perhaps in other more stable parts of the world. When I say stable, I mean stable from a jurisdictional point of view and stable from a macroeconomics point of view, or even political point of view, one could say as well. So, so there's ever some new challenge along, throughout an airline's lifespan, and in Azul was like that, and even for me, again, I would say lots of opportunities. I think definitely a great thing that airlines bring to young people entering and choosing to go into this career in aviation is opportunities, right? Because there's ever something happening, and one thing, again, another metaphor I like using, there's a plate falling there, and if you're that type of person that don't want to see a plate falling and you're going to grab it, you're going to do something else, there is a place for you on an airline for sure. So, and a startup, even more so, right? So everybody's trying to gauge, what's going to happen. At the time I joined in June of 2009, there was nothing called as a fleet department. There wasn't a fleet department because, the airline was barely baby stepping, right? So I got into, the legal department, and the legal department was pretty much leading most of those negotiations, obviously hand in hand with the finance department, but you did not have a fleet or aircraft programs, as we called it at Azul. So that was something that came, I would say, like 4 years or so later. Because again, and it's, one could say like, oh yeah, it's a label. Yeah, it's like the, how do you departmentize? Like how do you structure that, right? So again, so as long as you were delivering and obviously it's working, I think the label and the title shouldn't matter as much, right? But it's interesting how you see, and how I'm very pleased to see where Azul is today, and have been like a little piece of that, in my 10 years there. Is just rewarding and incredible. So, I navigated from legal department to like finance, like fleet under the technical department. I have friends, engineer friends that actually tell me, they used to joke at Azul, would say that I had an honorary badge for an engineer, because whenever I was negotiating with people, especially like engine OEMs, some people never knew that I was a lawyer, right? Or they thought like I was like an airline major, or maybe an engineer major, which none of that, right? So and eventually it happened more often than not. People say like, somebody told me you're a lawyer. Is that really true? And I said, yeah, I used to be one. Like, I don't even pay my bar anymore. Let's cut that off. It's so one of those things, because I was always so interested in learning, and I remember sitting in hours, like 5 hours calls, between like technical people talking about stuff, and I was just there like sponging, trying to understand, because the way I felt about it is like, look, for me to be able to negotiate, a deal, either a purchase of an aircraft, or an aircraft lease, or an aircraft financing, there's a gigantic piece of the value that's on the technical piece of the aircraft, delivery conditions, and if you don't master that to a general sense, obviously you're not going to do a great negotiation. Right. And obviously I'll never do anything alone. Like, you do bring it's a team effort. Like, you do bring, the tech team aside, and, more of the finance experts along. But, you do have to have some general sense of it. Otherwise, how are you going to bring those pieces together and understand, okay, I'm going to have to give up this, I'm going to have to elect that. But overall, this is like the great, solution, and the value. There's the money value, and there's like the holistic value, right?
Yep.
You have to, look for both, obviously. But, I was always very interested in learning about other areas within the company, like accounting, like Jesus, like how much there is in decision making, for the right deal for you in accounting. Tax, obviously, like, let's not even talk about tax. It's like the certainties in life, right? Tax is one of them. So, so always, trying to absorb and learn to become a better professional, to be able to navigate a little bit of those different waters whenever you're doing like a huge transaction, right? So I'm forever thankful for Azul to allowing me, enabling me to kind of learn from all those areas. And I think that's the beauty of an airline.
This is something, a conversation that I tend to get into with if I'm talking to college students or college grads and ask them what they want to do. And they say, I'm in finance and I'm interested in aviation. I'm like, okay, great. So what do you know about aviation? They're like, well, I know that the financial world works like this. I said, I know, but what do you know about the engine aircraft relationship? What do you know about, the technical side? Just what's a hot section? Like, you may want to know what that is, right? These type of things. Not that I expect them to know, but sometimes their response is, I don't need to know that. And I'm like, then aviation's not for you. Because it's not that you need what you need to know or what you don't need to know. The answer is as much as you can. And it's that curiosity that you have to really make it in aviation. Not necessarily because it's not like you can do your job without it. The problem is that the people in aviation are likely here because they have that curiosity, and you will get frustrated and just kind of kicked out the bottom end because we're nuts. We're like crazy to be in this industry.
Yeah, no, spot on.
Garrick especially.
No, spot on. Spot on. I think a huge level of curiosity and interest is mandatory to work in this industry. And for as much as, okay, but let me perhaps look at another perspective. You do have, and more, it's not wrong, okay? It's actually even, it goes with professionalism and how do you evolve in terms of structure. You do have, segments, and you do have specialization. And yes, you got to have those things. But to your point, you always going to be an expert on something, but you need to have, you need to maybe want and be interested in kind of holding and wearing a little bit of different hats sometimes to do your job better as an expert. Like you can be an expert, but you're going to do your job better, if you actually are interested and want to absorb and expand on your knowledge. And the airline industry allows you to do that every day. So as long as you're curious, as long as you're interested, right? So I do think, that's definitely key to our industry. And again, I think the people, right? I go back to people. We fly people places, right? That's what we do, and we bring people together. It's about the personal relationships as well. Yes, it's about the professional relationships, but it does become personal lots of times, right? Like you do not necessarily have to become best friends with whomever you're dealing with, but sometimes it happens, right? You do connect because of common interests, common views, behaviors, right? And I think that has to click, right? Because there are cultures and cultures, right? Like what I like saying in leasing is that even in the same country, you have airlines that can be very, very, very different in the very same country. They speak the same language, they brought up in a similar environment, but not only and sometimes the business model is the same, but the culture is very different. Or even sometimes the business model is different, and they're not. So you have to be appreciative of, the singularities and peculiarities of, each company, each airline, each leasing company. Leasing companies are not the same. Not necessarily from the way they do accounting, because we know some people do accounting differently, but from the way they approach the business. So and that's okay, and it's not this is right or this is wrong. It's choices. It's just about choices, right? It's the choices you make along the way, and again, back to my point about people. I think there are cultures that are, one way, and I'll talk about like cultures, Dave Milliman Company's cultures, right? Like I worked in one of them. I didn't work in all of them, but, one thing one would say is that, I learned a lot. And trust me, like I'm, an admin person, but one thing I learned a lot at Azul is customer service. It's all about customer service. Stop, watch, and act. Like people want to be treated not the same way as you would want. People want to be treated the same way as they would want. Like whatever you feel it's best for you, it's not the best for me. If you don't stop, watch, and listen, you will not appreciate that. So I think that even working, from an admin perspective, I learned a lot of that. And the culture about, it's, not giving up or not ever being enough. There's, David has a saying that I'll take with me forever. And people that worked with him will probably ring a bell to this. He likes saying, "How hard can it be? How hard can it be, Priscilla? Don't tell me no. How hard can it be? So it's like pushing you, like driving you, pushing. We're gonna do this. Let's get it done. There's no it's like it's another industry, but impossible is nothing, right? Like there's nothing impossible, right? It's let's how hard can it be? It just keeps motivating you and pushing you to get it done. That culture, like it's maybe it's not for everybody, but I honestly click with that. I think it motivates you to just ever pursuing some other challenge and delivering it. So I think that culture, and then today, like led by John at Azul, John Rogerson, like I had the pleasure to work with him as well. Not always the easiest person, but I'll tell you, he'll push you, he'll drive you, he'll motivate you. I think, and again, an airline business, need that type of motivation. Like you look at individuals that are CEOs of airlines or, entrepreneurial people, in this industry, they do have that drive, right, on them. And I'm glad they do, because the industry need that. I think, that's, airlines are, you're there, 24/7, you're worn out to death and you don't realize, and it's okay. And it's okay. And you talk to people that work at airlines, and they say, "Oh my God, you're tired." Yeah, I'm tired, but I'm happy, right? In most circumstances. So I think that's quite interesting, how people can be drained into the airline, work, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and not complain about it. How many industries or businesses you see that as often? I think you do need to be crazy to be an airline.
Because I just had this conversation with somebody, and it's all around work-life balance. and just how if they wanted work-life balance, they weren't able to move up in the company, which I got fuzzy all of a sudden. Sorry.
Yeah, he's
Which aviation is very unique, especially at a startup airline, because it's not that, like you said, like there are just long hours because there are just a lot of things to do. And it's not that there's no work-life balance. It's just that there are people whose work-life balance is way more balanced, and they get fulfillment from the work. And aviation is like that. Like I said, we're kind of crazy. So this isn't an argument, against work-life balance. It's just that you're competing against people that have that different like equilibrium point. And that really shows in the startup scenarios, like Azul, like where you were. And it sounds to me like what you're talking about is that was a very fulfilling time. Hard, but that's also what made it fulfilling.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think the achievements, that and that sentiment of it's a team achievement, right? It's a team effort. That was very rewarding, and I see that in a lot of other airlines. And it's interesting enough, like ULCCs or LCCs, right? If you think about it, because they do tend to have the thing about being leaner, meaning not having as many people like doing, so you have like 2-3 people doing jobs where you have some, and I don't mean bad by saying this, like legacy carriers having like 10 people doing. So you have that, people dancing to different tunes, and it's okay, and so yeah, it's. But anyway, if we talk about again leasing companies, it's more, you have like more experience, more segmentation. But gladly enough, I do work in marketing, so I still have a lot of fun. I have the benefit to talk to a lot of airlines every day. That's actually very 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 beneficial, and something that I found very pleasing is again the talking to different airlines about how they see the business from a different way and sometimes the same way. I think that's super reinvigorating every day when you get the benefit of doing that. But yeah.
So you talked about Garrett, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Can I? Yeah, if I could say something, that'd be great. Well, no, it just I for those that look at that have an interest in aviation, when you think about an airline, ultimately, like an airline touches pretty much every aspect of aviation, right? Every level, whether it's finance, whether it's legal, whether it's on the maintenance side, whether it's with OEMs, right? So from that standpoint, like if you're interested in getting like enthralled in aviation, working for an airline is great. Working for a smaller airline, you probably have much more of that because you're then wearing a lot of different hats, right? If you go bigger airline, you probably do, at that point, there's a lot of people, so you're working on one thing or another. But, and that's ultimately why I think, airlines are so important for the industry overall, just because of the fact that they do support everybody else, right? It starts at the top, and they deal with from the passenger all the way down to everything else, right? And so, it's really great.
Airports, go and work in an airport and see like how handling gets done, right? Like see how people like over the counter are like taking about like aircraft being delayed or canceling flights. They're the face of the airline talking to a customer, but what happened? It was like a technical failure that somebody technical going to do, and depending on what happened, you and the fleet may have to talk to the lessor about it or not, and the guy there on the ground, in the airport is actually having the effect of that, dealing with your passenger. And then in the end, how that affects your revenue management and network planning, and how you're going to have to reroute the aircraft, and then eventually even your branding. And then you go talk to comms and, like branding of the airline and how that, so it's so multidisciplinary, so rich, right? That, I think it's one of the beauties of our industry. Gladly enough, there's a lot of opportunities and work, again, to the point where, I could have worked in an airline, working in, my second leasing company now. And, there's room for everybody. And airlines, do need even more so nowadays, the support of what, leasing companies can do in terms of like bringing aircraft. But, as you said before, there is, what the OEMs are doing, and that's the one box I haven't ticked, right? Like working for an OEM. But, it's one of these things you guys have. So maybe, Garrick, you can talk about it as well.
He can't.
But
I thought about it, but
Yeah, it's very rewarding, that you're able to deal with so many people with so many different, backgrounds and, and angles towards the same industry, right? I think we keep just going on circles on this topic, but I think it comes to say that, enough said about the industry. It's definitely one, as I said, I got into the industry by chance, but again, to use another cliche saying, got bit by the bug, right? And, runs in my veins. It's really hard to get out of, this industry because, where else is it going to be as fun?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Right. I mean, when you think about it, and I think everybody that we talk to has that same kind of story of like, once you kind of really get into it and you see what it really means and the fact that it's such a global industry and it touches everything, it's like, oh, well, this is really cool. Why would I do anything else? Right. And even when you hear, people say, well, you know what, they're going to go do something else in another industry. At the end of the day, you're like, well, you're just going to be doing the same thing somewhere else. You just don't deal with the same cool people. So do you really want to go? Right. It's like,
you don't get
we're biased.
It's like that saying, like Pratt and Whitney. I used to have like a mug from Pratt and Whitney that said, "I love the smell of jet fuel in the morning."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and those of us that can actually smell it, as you just said that, know that we're right, because we're all thinking it like, oh yeah, I remember that smell. Yeah.
It's like the feeling I have when if for some reason I spend a month without going to an airport. It's like getting like an itchy feeling, right? Like, okay, I love I love my carry-on. I love that rolling through the airport. It's one of these things you get addicted to. I know it may sound really silly for people that will not appreciate that, but it's one of these things. Like we love those day-to-day routines that actually aviation bring you routines that actually the routine of the aviation is that there's not as many routines necessarily. It's just like ever changing. So that's it.
So in aviation, small industry, relationships are really important. That I think is pretty well documented. Then we go one step further into kind of the aircraft space, which I would argue relationships are even kind of more critical in that space. Really small. It's whoever shows up at the ISTAT conferences, right? I mean, that's kind of our world. But then let's drill down one step deeper, because I really want to talk about this, where not many people realize this. That's normally where most people's kind of drill down ends. Like, oh yeah, look how much relationships matter. You take that and then you apply it to Latin America, where like the relationship is everything. And everybody says, any region, anybody from any region will say that about their region. But Latin America is like the quintessence of that. It is all about relationships and talking about families, and the hug is a big thing in Latin America. Yeah. I'm really interested in kind of your perspective on Latin America, not just from the relationship standpoint.
Yeah.
It was the most fun region I ever worked in, from the OEM perspective. And I was in leasing. I was in North America, where there's always something going on in North America, but you never had the drama like you had in Latin America.
The drama.
What's it like?
No, the drama is a good way of saying it, right? But I couldn't.
It's a telenovela.
It's a telenovela. Mexican. That's what in Brazil. In Brazil, we say it's a Mexican novela. That's how we say.
There you go. Okay.
Long. But yeah, no, you're preaching to the choir. I couldn't be more proud actually to be able to talk about my region, right? And Latin America is like that. We get deals done during meals, right? You do like every transactions are done over lunch or over dinner. Like most cases, I go see a customer in a country, and they don't want me to go to their offices. They want me to let's go and talk. Let's have a 2-hour lunch or a 3-hour dinner. And to some extent, I think it's people's willingness to be more open about their personal lives in some cases, right, in some circumstances. And when actually you do have the trust of another individual, you do know, I know how many kids they have, what football team they go for, right, and what they're doing, what sports they're practicing over the weekend. That's where you connect to those things, and it's much easier to get a deal done when you get to that level of relationship. Again, as I said, you don't have to become best friends with people, but there is a genuine appreciation towards understanding and getting to know the person beyond just the work relation, right? So that's, I think it's not as common to have as much of that elsewhere, perhaps. And but yeah, I think people are more open. And to your point about we hug, we kiss. It's funny because I go places, and I get to the office in, let's say, Dublin, or office in San Francisco, and I start hugging people and kissing. And I said, I'm sorry, that's how we do. Where I'm from, that's I kiss and I hug. It means well, okay. But also people feel weird about it. But it's so common where we come from. It just means appreciation, right? And yeah, I'm very pleased to work in this industry, in this region specifically. And for as much as we can say, like Latin America, right, is a gigantic region, if you think about it, right? Brazil is huge with more than 200 million people. Like Mexico, like huge. And Argentina, Colombia, Chile, and you just, can start naming Caribbean, like all the islands, and you go from places where you speak Portuguese, you speak Spanish, you speak some variations, like different slangs. Like go to Colombia, the slang is different than Mexico, than different than Argentina or Chile. But and then speak English in some places in the Caribbean. But one thing you'll say is that people are, genuinely, they want to be closer to one another, and there is more openness to talk about things outside of aviation. You do talk about business, but you do talk more openly about politically what's happening, or and people do give their own personal views about things without being shy or afraid of, oh, this is not professional enough. People talk about it. They talk about day-to-day stuff, and they give their opinion, and it's okay. It's our culture, right? And maybe alienated to people coming from other areas, say like, oh my God, like they're so open about things, right? That's how we are. But one thing I'll say is that there is so much opportunity in this part of the world. People still fly so little in Latin America compared to other regions. You have I was looking at data another day about passengers flown last year in Brazil. It's like 0.5 trips per year per person. It's you go to the US, it's like 4 times that. You go to Europe, many places, even double that. It's like four trips per year per person, like in Spain or something. So and you have this gigantic landscape, geographical hurdles, and people own buses for 15-20 hours to get places. So it is still so much, I think, untapped and demand and unserved markets. But then you can say, well, why is that? Why hasn't burst? Why? I still think there is, again, some political hurdles, some places that drive to some extent a little bit of like, jurisdictional instability. You do need to have some foundations, and like Cape Town, approved people would want that. Some countries still do not have it. It doesn't prevent you to do business there, but there is some things. It's like, oh my God, how come you still do not have that? Regulatory measurements and bases like in Brazil, we're still baby stepping, and there's still debate in Congress about charging for bags. How can you have a ULCC coming and stepping in if you cannot have ancillaries? If not, they're not regulated, and or they do release a legislation one day, and then 6 months later somebody else comes and debates that and changes it again. So those things, unfortunately, are still bring obstacles to, I think, greater expansion. But and economy, definitely like stabilization of the local economies as well. There's Argentina is one. Again, I cheer a lot from my friends in Argentina that things do go to some sort of like stabilization anytime soon there, because there is people are flying. People want to fly a lot in Argentina, and you have today LATAM lap there. You have like pretty much today you have 2 big airlines there. But they're flying very high load factors, and people. I go to the airport there. I go to customs. It's like takes me 2 hours. It's like people everywhere, so people want to fly, and to some extent, in some circumstances, there's just not enough service for the demand that, again, the suppressed demand that there is. So and I look working at the leasing space. Traditionally, you'll see in terms of exposure, right, for leasing companies, Latin America represents what 8 to 10% of any lessor's exposure, and then that there has to do with again expectations on risk assessments, on exposure, on again, do I want to have as much aircraft there compared vis-a-vis to other areas in the world. So we do have another, again, a saying here from Brazil, is the land of the future. We've been the land of the future for a long time, but I do believe there is some, hopefully, realization of that as it comes. There are, more aircraft flying in Brazil right now than there used to be, 10 years ago. And I still believe, that demand, there's 3 big airlines in Brazil today, for as much as I know, like Gol is in a restructuring position right now. But, when you look back, again, what happened with CARES Act in the US during COVID, there was no such a thing of that happening
Right.
in Latin America. There's no support. Those airlines had to, fight their own way in spite of, all of these unforeseen events and, increasing costs, and they didn't have a single support. Like you go to Europe, airlines were aided. You were in the US, airlines were aided. You were in Asia, and then and then you go here. Why there was like so many Chapter 11s in this industry, like in Latin America. But yeah, like those airlines are fighting their own battles, by themselves, right or wrong. But I do believe there are, Avianca is stronger today, or Mexico, LATAM, and goes undergoing that now. Azul did like an off-port restructure, but those guys are still out there, and they're fighting their battles, and they are essential players in this industry, globally speaking, like all of these names that I named. But yeah, I think there's room for more. I'll leave with that message. I think there's room for more in Latin America, but there's some basic things that do drive a little bit of obstacles for more entry players. But there is room for more.
So what do you think is the biggest obstacle for airline? Because you say obviously in certain regions people want to fly, right? Which if you were looking at like a market like the US or Europe, right? If people want to fly, airlines will serve that, right? They'll add more airplanes, they'll do what they need to do to try to capture that, right? And then they'll do it probably a bit too much, and then that's when you see fares going down, right? So what's stopping, even in Brazil or Argentina, or what's stopping that from happening? There's got to be, is it? I don't know. I'd love to hear your take on that.
I believe, in success or in failure, there's never one thing alone that drives it, right? So it's not one reason alone why it's not happening. It's a series of things. One I haven't named, infrastructure. Like I remember, back in my Azul days, there are places that Azul flies with an ATR, with a turboprop, because there was no fire brigade in the airport to sustain a jet.
Yeah.
And that's Brazil, the biggest economy in Latin America, right? I was, again, because I'm Brazilian, it's easier for me to bring data from Brazil. But, Brazil has, more than 5,000 municipalities, okay? And yet, airlines fly to 130, maybe 140 airports, destinations in the country.
Yeah.
There's some tiny municipalities on those 5,000, but just to show you the disparity, right? But there's like infrastructure obstacles, there is regulation obstacles, there are, jurisdictional obstacles, and all of that drives a little bit of uncertainty and eventually higher costs to operate. That's it's just difficult to sustain, the right returns in those overall scenarios, right? But it's been proven that it can work. You look, it's not too long ago that, Latin America has ULCCs and successful ULCCs. Looking at what's happening in Mexico, like Volaris, Viva, right? And it can prove them, like 2 ULCCs can survive in the same country, even in Latin America, but you still have the legacy carriers who have her in Mexico, right? And you go and, what's happening in Chile, you have Sky, you have JetSmart, you have LATAM, right? And you see like Flybondi entering like the Argentinian market. You have, aerolíneas. Unfortunately, what happened in Colombia, right? With Viva falling away, but you have Avianca, you have JetSmart entering there. You have LATAM, but you have like Avianca coming out of Chapter 11 a little bit, readjusting their model to drive their costs down. I think very wise of them. So there is room. Like everywhere I talk, you see there's like 1, 2, 3 players. Right? But still, when I go back to the data and to statistics, I think the one country where it has like a 1-for-1 trip per year is Chile. Everywhere else it begins, it's a point something, right? And
well, part of that's because how else are you going to get anywhere in Chile? right? You cross the Andes, which is a pain in the butt, if not by air, or you're driving a long way north and south.
North and south. It's a huge, kind of, again, the geography, as you rightly so said about the Andes, like it's another maybe reason why one should fly more if you think about it, and that's actually true for Colombia. The geographic in Colombia is so difficult that actually, it's one of the places where, and Avianca is a 100-year-old airline. It's embedded in their culture that people fly. Because like going on buses in Colombia is very difficult because it's all steep and go down and up, down and up. But, I still think that, a region that it's ever growing, again, when you look at, birth ratios and things like that, there's a place in the world, there's still like growth, in terms of population is here. It's disproportional, like the level of, I think growth in aviation compared to, the demand and the needs for this part of the world. But it's changing. I think our generation is seeing it improving and hopefully will keep ever growing. Again, there's room for that. I don't see this industry shrinking in this part of the world at all. On the contrary, it should be going 180 on the other side. And hopefully you guys, Courtney and Garrick, are going to be able to do more business in Latin America. And that's definitely, I think I can see that happening. I think the ups and downs of, nowadays, like one of the hurdles is, there's not enough aircraft out there for the ones that want it, right? And that's a global, thing. But so people still want to fly and more than ever want to fly. But yeah, we're seeing a little bit of, an obstacle, from the supply chain issues that's affecting the two major, but everybody in that sense, aircraft manufacturers and all of the engine manufacturers for that matter. So, I could hear, could still be here, preaching for more aircraft in Latin America. There aren't enough aircraft, anywhere anyways. Which is good for leasing, okay? I'm not complaining. I'm actually, it's great for leasing.
Yeah.
So we've talked about several of the airlines, but there's one you didn't mention that I call the anomaly, because this airline is so different in the region. I don't understand. Well, I mean, I guess I kind of do, but Copa Airlines kills it year after year after year, and I know a lot of that has to do with Panama and a lot of the work that. The cooperation with the local authorities, and I don't know if you call local and federal. I mean, they're all kind of the same in Panama, but like Copa is we talk about the ebb and flow of Latin America, and yet those ebb and flows still apply to Copa, and yet not nearly as much as what you see out of. I mean, the airlines you listed, Aeromexico, Avianca, LATAM. These are centuries old names, LATAM through LAN and TAM, of course, and all having gone through restructuring, right? Yeah. It's just the challenge of Latin America today. And then there's Copa. Yeah. No, Courtney, help me out. Round of applause for Copa right now. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I'm a fan. I'm a fan, and I'm a fan for what they do as a business, as an airline. And again, back to the people. Pedro, Jose, Victor, who want to talk a lot. Like they are. It's an amazing, group of individuals, an amazing business. Again, I think one thing retrofeeds from the other, right? A great group of individuals that actually have a great business going on. And I remember when I was at GCAS during COVID, they were, I think, if not maybe the only one in the world, but definitely in the Americas, which was my region, that were grounded for 6 months and paid everything on time. Wow. No deferrals, they paid to the dime, everything on time. Right. And there's a lot to be said about that, right? You're not generating any revenue and you're paying all your dues without asking for any excuses or delays or deferrals. So that says, I think it's a great example. It's a real life example of what, how they do it. And, generating, the numbers and the results, the profitability, throughout, a decade or more. And the hub, what they created, to your point, in Panama, especially when I go into the Caribbean, I have two options coming where I come from. I either connect in Panama or I go to Miami and back. Right.
And I'll tell you, like, Copa is so efficient. I think the name, if I were to, use one word, like, those games, one airline, one word, Copa, efficient.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like so efficient. You could connect, and you have that time blocked 50 minutes connection, and it's going to work. Because you do not have customers, you do not have passport control, and the airport works, and they are one of the most on-time airlines. Like, having all of that big connectivity, they're still like heavily on time. So what else do you want? You want to go to point A to point B, on time. They deliver.
Yeah.
They deliver, and so it's again, I didn't mean as a joke. It's really like they deserve standing ovation, for what they've been consistently, doing and delivering, and they are, and I mean well by saying this, a role model to many, if not most, of the airlines in Latin America. But I think other parts of the world should look at what Copa is doing, it's efficient. And it's transparent, and I'm a fan of the team there as well. What they do, they have say another thing they do really well. They have promotion when they try to captivate new pilots. Their signs, when they call for pilots, are all women, and they do that intentionally because they want to bring back to my point. Like, if you see it, you can be it. They do say, like, come be a pilot at Copa. It's a woman. They have I know because I worked with them a few years back. They have like a very strong D&I culture, and they have a very strong, mottos and programs internally about bringing, diversity and women to the airline. Again, I think they're trying to work really well, not only on the profitability piece, not only on the operational piece, but also on the culture piece. So I'm really a fan of Copa and what they do.
Yeah, they're a pain in the butt to all the other airlines in the region because, look, Latin America is a tough market. You mentioned Bogota, amazing place, its own challenges. Panama's up the street. I mean, it's a long, windy street that actually doesn't make it there, but you get the idea.
To interrupt you with the pain in the butt, I'll say one thing. I work in leasing, okay? It's almost impossible to do a leasing transaction with Copa, okay? Because, they're so efficient and they have cash in hand. All they want to do is JOLCOs and JOLs in Japan because they can get the cheap money. So honestly, I'm a fan, but I'd let, Victor, Jose, Pedro listening there. I want to do deals with you, please,
So your comment on the employment, right? So this, to me, and I may be wrong here, but when I consider Panama and the idea of hiring, you have a limited local market, right? It's a big city, but still you're running what I would call probably not a global airline, but a hemispherical. Is that a word? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. You're covering the entire Western hemisphere. And the idea, like, this seems to be the right way to do it. Like, listen, we need access to great people. Regardless. I don't care who it is. Like, that is a core concern for, and not just Copa, but in Latin America, Uruguay comes to mind. It's a small kind of population, but at the time you had Pluna and some other various operators in there. But how do you attract the talent? And what a great way to do it, right? Actually have access to all the great qualified people of your population, and then of course globally as well.
But Courtney, I see that throughout the airlines nowadays. You look, there are, Arajet is a new entrant in the market, and they're going to try to replicate to some extent, not exactly what Copa is doing, but they want to do like a hub of Santo Domingo and things like that. And I cheer for them to succeed. But they have people, that their fleet manager now, Estevan, came from Wiz, and Scott, their CFO, is American, and you go and you look at, the people, in JetSmart. You have people from all over the world working in JetSmart. You have, a lot of people came from JetBlue to begin Azul, and have like a lot of big American culture at Azul. You do have, at Avianca now, you do have people from all over the world working in Avianca, from their CEO, CFO. You look at Avianca, you do have the Colombians, but you have like a huge group of people that come from other countries, Chileans and Colombians and and Brazilians, and and Indians like all working in Avianca. So I think more and more as part of the evolution of the the airlines in this part of the world, they do realize like we got to bring talents from other places to maybe hopefully expand and bring up I want to say teach is maybe too harsh of a word, but try to enable other youngsters to come from this region and learn from them and grow and have their own possibilities. So I think I see more and more of that in Latin America, which is great. It's again we're just being like an example of the globalization in the world and how there's even more people coming from other places in the world that want to work in Latin America. To your point, there's a lot of challenges, but there's so much potential and so much one can prove right in Latin America in spite of the hurdles that we see here.
Yeah, and even with all of that, right? What drives me crazy is that then you still have people that are like, we shouldn't be flying, and yet when you look at the benefits of what flying does from a global perspective, and I'm not talking about obviously the emissions, the pollution, there's sustainability, right? There's a lot of different aspects that we can work on making better. But at the end of the day, the benefits of what travel does to the world is like unbelievable, right? Because how would you know that a specific country has great talent in certain fields if you don't go and understand the culture, right? Yeah. Like you're not able to do that, right? And so that to me, it just kind of those the naysayers of like, oh, you shouldn't be traveling and you should just stay home. And it's like, oh, come on. Like there's so much to offer around the world. Like that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, but Latin America is unique in that perspective as well so you mentioned the buses from a Brazilian perspective, I think you were talking. Yeah. But have you seen buses in Mexico? I promise you they're not what you think they are. They're like full lie flat, like what we would consider like top of the line first class seating, and they're overnight buses and they're like 12 hours and they last I checked, I don't know if this is still the case, but last I checked years ago, more Mexicans were moving by bus intercity between cities than aircraft. Yeah. Right? So here's this very developed transportation network and Brazil has that as well, not as much developed on the rail side.
It is very similar, and because why few reasons for that. Flying in this region, it's still very expensive. So it's about the price point. You're a consumer. Think of it, a consumer mind. It's the price point. I can fly to point A to point B. It's gonna take me 2 hours. And it's going to cost me, $1,000. I can go to the same point A to point B. It's going to take me, 10 hours, but it's going to cost me $200. Now, like you're price sensitive, unless you're doing it for business, like what are you going to do? I can do 5 trips of, 200 and go this place, and I can only do once by plane. So I think back to the point of untapped, demand. And it is still very expensive. And the ULCCs are trying to break the mold globally, but specifically talk about South America. The same. Can you imagine what Ryanair, EasyJet are for Europe, right? Like it's just incredible. Yeah. And back in the days, you were go back 15, 20 years ago when I began this industry 20 years ago. Like all I knew was like the British Airways and Air France and KLM and Iberia and TAP. It's what the luxury kind of, assessment, like you think about an airplane, you think about luxury, right? And the LCCs and ULCCs came to break the mold, to allow and make it more affordable and make people to actually fly more. So I think in Latin America, there's still, it's still scarce in terms of that, but, and that's where there is so much room because these people are moving places. They're not staying still in their cities. They are going, but they are spending days on the bus to get those places because it's what they can afford. It's how they can do. And again, back to the infrastructure, the jurisdictional issues and regulatory issues, and that drive cost. And that's going to translate into a more expensive ticket, right? So Brazil, the lie flat, I've done it. Okay, look, I work in aviation for 20 years. Okay, haven't I done the trip back to see my parents in Rio. It's like a 7 hour on the bus. It's a full lie flat, double deck, air conditioning, things like that for 10% of the cost of going on. Yes, I have. Right. And do I do it as much anymore? Thankfully not. But again, I'm talking about a 20-year, span where there is some evolution. There's more aircraft serving, places, but there's still a huge lag. Huge lag.
This is the way that I describe Latin America, and I may be wrong, but I'm testing this out. Latin America is just like any other region in the world, only more so. You think relationships matter? Yes, they do. They matter way more in Latin America. You think the consumer matters and how they choose their mode of transportation? Yes, they do, and way more in Latin America, right? By the way, you think currency risk and that risk matters? It does. Way more in Latin America.
Yeah. No, I think it's more intense, right? I think that's the word.
Yeah.
And it's just more intense. And I'm gonna do one for me here. I think think people are passionate about the industry. Yes, they are. Way more in Latin America.
I believe it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So do you think? I mean, you touched on the infrastructure piece. I mean, is that something that you see that's changing? Where I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to what resources and funding do you put towards expanding it, right? And that's been if you look at like India, right? That's been the biggest problem there for a long time, right? It was all about infrastructure, and I think that's changing. It's not as fast because of obviously there's a lot of hurdles, but it's still changing. But do you see that in Latin America or
not as much as it should? Look at Mexico. To use Courtney's enough of Brazil, guys. I don't know when was the last time you flew to Mexico City, but that airport is just insane. It shouldn't be like that. It's a city of the size of a mega city. Mexico City, it's a mega city, it's a megalopolis, right? It's just mind-boggling that you have an airport from and I'm going to be misquoting, but it does look like it as if it's from the 70s. And it does. Your first impression when you go there, you blink your eye, you think of a bus station, and not a good one. And it's a shame. It's a shame because you have, as I said, 3 amazing carriers in that country, right? Flying modern, average life, super young, single-digit, aircraft in an outdated airport, and and that drives into how comfortable it is for the passenger, maybe how much they could be connecting, how efficient their operations could be, So that's detrimental to everything that the airlines are doing in terms of bringing like modern technology, the best, cabin, best customer experience, and then part of the customer experience is deteriorated about, from that airport, right? And it's, if not, the second biggest, capital in Latin America. And it's the second biggest country in population, like it's Brazil and Mexico. And
it's the second largest city in all of the Americas, right? I mean, because we're talking like 30 million, right?
Yeah. It's like a metropolitan area, right? The city, but yeah, pretty much. Sure. São Paulo has 20.
I mean, it's massive,
million, right?
Yeah.
30 million. So you talk about countries. Like the countries do not have 20.
Like Canada has 33 million people.
You know what I mean? And you're talking about Mexico City, right? So it's a shame and it's a pity. And there's political debates. I'm not going to go into that. Yeah. It's political debates. There was a modern new airport. The government wants to go to another airport. What are they going to do there? But it's clear, just to name one place, that some improvement. There's clearly improvements that are needed, even to go along hand in hand with what the airlines are trying to do, right? It's a shame. And you do have Bruges Airport is a decent airport in São Paulo. Santiago, is a decent airport. But you're talking about one airport again, as I said, in places where you have 200 million people, 100 million people, like cities that have 10 million people. There's more that perhaps could be done to, again, boost and enable and catapult, a bigger expansion. But yeah, it demands, investment. You go to the US, you see airlines, taking part in expanding terminals, right? At their own, like this is not allowed in this part of the world. So even if an airline wanted to build a terminal, they're not allowed because of, regulatory constraints. So, I'm not saying the airlines are all of a sudden today, let's do it. But even if they wanted, and I remember having this conversation at Azul, and one day, like David said, I want to do something in competition. You cannot because, it's not allowed by law.
Yeah. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Yeah,
you do depend on the interest and will of the authorities to doing so. I think in Brazil, there's some change now happening. There's a lot of privatizations of airports taking place. It began a few years back. It's still happening, trying to modernize, the airports that do exist for them to being privatized. And I think that's an interesting step. I'm not here going to say, oh, I prefer this versus that. But it's an interesting step trying to, so let's take that out of the hands from the government and let's, give this to private, institutions that will do this and modernize and keep the airports, to a better standard, right? So that is happening, and it's happening for a while now, in Brazil. But I think a little bit of more of a look into that infrastructure piece perhaps could be another enabler. Again, is that thing alone will do it? No, as I said, it's never one thing alone. But there's pieces and pieces, and that's definitely an important piece.
The clear outlier in all of that is exactly what you mentioned, Mexico City, quite frankly. And for political reasons, they had an airport replacement. Of course, that prevented upgrade, all this, right? Whatever. I know nothing about Mexican politics, but the Mexican economy is great, right? There's no reason for it. But I think of Guarulhos. I think of Santiago, Bogota. Like these are all world-class airports, for sure. Yeah. I would even throw Panama City in there as well. Although I think they're kind of like beyond world-class in the they don't spend where they don't need to. Right? There's
a new terminal, right? In Panama, there's a terminal 2 now that's very modern. There's a little bit of debate. Oh, we're gonna do terminal 1, terminal 2. But see, they're trying to expand. They're trying to do something. Clearly, terminal 1 became too small for everything. All the flying that was driving Panama. I'm sorry, Copa was driving there. Again, I don't wanna. I want to be clear. Like everything we're saying about Mexico here. I wish, as a passenger that flies into Mexico City, right? Every year, a few times a year, I think, that economy, that country deserves, something in line with, with the demand and with, the aircraft that's been flying there. It's one piece of the puzzle that definitely could boost them even further. So I cheer that, whichever shape and form that takes place, because, whatever the airlines are doing there is definitely incredible. It's amazing when you look back at, Mexico 10 years ago and Mexico today in terms of, airlines and how many aircraft that's flying, how many people they're flying. It's clearly an evolution. And if only infrastructure walked parallel to that, right?
Yeah. And then you have, so one of my favorite airlines right now, not airline, but carriers, I don't know what we call them, but what Mercado Libre is doing, particularly in Brazil on the cargo side, right? You see that growth, you see the opportunity, and Latin America has just those especially. So the way I always described Latin America, the entire South American continent is east of Florida. That's like that was the biggest mind thing for me, just getting past that. It's not actually south, it's actually southeast. But you have two kind of, from like an aircraft performance perspective, two Latin Americas. You have those within reach of North America, so kind of Central America, Caribbean, and then South America, so Colombia, I would say Venezuela, but Peru, Ecuador, right? And then you have a giant jungle that might as well be an ocean, right? Yeah. And then you have kind of Brasilia, Sao Paulo, Rio, Santiago, Ezeiza, right? These airports. But it has this very unique geography right through the middle of it that creates its own challenges.
I agree with you. And I'll say more. Courtney. I think one thing that is true to be said about mid-class Latin people from South America or even Mexico or the Caribbean is that culturally, historically, we fly more to the US or fly more to Europe than we fly intra-country or intra-South America or Latin America for that matter, right? Brazilians, and I'm even going to talk about Mexico that does border, which is the biggest, cross-border flights in the world. It's between Mexico and the US, right? And that's a fact. But, from Brazil, like Brazilians, go to, Disney World more often than they fly to the northeast of their own country, right? And
I was on one of those flights on accident, Sao Paulo to Orlando.
Yeah.
I thought, here's a cheap way to get back. Woof.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow, the crying kids, and it was nuts.
Yeah. No, people in Brazil joke that Florida is the 27th state of Brazil. It's like especially in the Orlando area, like Lauderdale more, Miami as well. But lots of people you hear people speaking Portuguese more than necessarily you do listen to people speaking in English. But it's a pity. And again, go back to, I think, the cost of flying, the untapped demand, airlines flying to not as many airports, infrastructure. So it's very expensive to fly within. So people see, okay, how much is it going to cost me to fly between, I'm going to go get to see like Bogota, or I'm going to go to Peru. It's, same or even slightly more expensive than going to Florida. And then what do they choose? Let's go to Florida. Right? Or it's okay. Am I going to do a trip, throughout, South America and get to go to like Chile, or should I go skiing in Santiago or Bariloche, or should I go skiing, in the Swiss Alps or in Lake Tahoe? Second option, third option.
Yeah,
so
that's crazy.
It's unfortunate, right? And I think there's a mindset, there's a cultural drive for sure. But I think again, back to everything we spoke, I'm not going to repeat that again in terms of cost, infrastructure, things that explains a lot of that. Yeah. So how do we change that? Right? It is a structural change, from culture, from cost, from perspective, and try to boost a little bit more like people traveling within, Latin America, South America, than actually traveling abroad. Until we have more airlines and, more planes, and, it's going to be hard to maybe boost that as much as perhaps as it should have. In my opinion. Yeah.
It's kind of you would think with the, I know with like let's say Mexico and Brazil as well. The level of like the skilled labor market there is excellent, right? If you think about the pool of people that you have within both Mexico, and that's kind of what's driving. Like in Mexico, there's been a lot of drive for like manufacturing, right? Because ultimately, a lot of so that you would think that would drive more investment to be able to, because that the more you do, the easier you make it for people to come, because the labor is there, that you should,
cheaper labor,
more money, right? Yeah.
I can say, Garrick, it's cheaper labor. It's cheaper labor.
Well, compared to, and the quality is great, right? And that's the thing.
Yeah. It's cheaper labor. So there is a lot of, manpower, know-how and quality, for if you compare it with definitely lower cost. But, I think for one, Embraer benefits a lot of that. I think that's whatever Embraer and then Courtney, probably that's one closer to you in terms of how, Bombardier and Embraer, back in the days were, more of a thing. But, there's amazing, if you think about a country like Brazil, have a manufacturer like Embraer, right? And develop, airplanes, like even like the military area, the executive planes, which is like thrives. Embraer thrives on the executive planes as well. But also, and you could debate, cost and benefit of, the E-jets and E1s and E2s, but, another day. But, it's just incredible how you're able to design and develop and, and manufacture an aircraft like that, in spite of all the hurdles we've been talking about that do exist in Latin America, right? So again, round of applause to Embraer and everything they've been doing.
Yeah, they deserve it.
No, it's true.
It hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts, but true.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right?
Absolutely.
And,
I'm always amazed every time I visit them, right? It's kind of like great people and like the things that they accomplish, right? It's talent. It's fantastic, right? Yeah.
So,
that's not
again,
new,
being
though.
Brazilian, very proud of having Embraer.
Yeah, that's what gets lost. It is that this isn't a new thing. Like Brazil, trust me, you go to Rio and they're going to be like, you see that airport there, the one on the island facing the mountain? That's called Santos Dumont.
Yeah.
That is named Santos Dumont because we were the first ones to fly. So everything you thought you knew.
Yes, we were the 14 bis. That's the real one. Right? It was Santos Dumont, the 14 bis. No, to your point. Again, that's just because I'm from Rio, I'm gonna have to just parenthetical very quickly. Most beautiful landing that could ever be is landing in Santos Dumont, and you should sit. When you enter the aircraft, take seat like F as in Fox, sit in F. And that's gonna be the most beautiful landing and experience one could have. It's just gorgeous, heavenly scent. You go like through the mountains and the Sugarloaf and around the bay, and the bridge, and then you land, pretty much in the bay. It's just it's gorgeous. Like everybody on the plane, if people are sitting on the other side of the plane, like A, B, and C, they're like leaning on the other side, like trying to see. Oh my God, I miss you. They're just like getting the phone. It's real. Yeah. If anybody listening to the podcast has done this landing, will laugh at the picture I just described because it's true. So
okay, I'll ruin it.
Yeah,
because I think the second landing you do at Santos Dumont is the most beautiful landing you've ever had, because the first landing, for anybody in aviation, knows how short that runway is.
Yeah, you hold your breath.
And for me, it was stressful. I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't flying. I was in the back, which makes it worse, right? You just see the numbers like 3, 2, 1. As we're still rolling down the runway, like okay. But no, it truly is.
You can look at the side. At least you can look at the side, and a little bit get your mind off that,
Yeah. That's when you're using those imaginary brakes with your feet, right? Both of your feet are down because you're going, come on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But so I do want to talk. We'll briefly is the time that we have left. So clearly you are a well-respected woman in aviation.
Thank you.
In Latin America, which is brings its own different kind of cultural element to it. But what I want, really, the question I want to ask is how, like what's the secret? What's the secret that you can pass along? So quite frankly, here's what I want to know. How do we get more great female guests willing to do the podcast and have amazing conversations like this?
Yeah, no. I'll definitely, support and work and help on that as much as I can. That's the first thing I'll have to say. Look, I don't think there's anything special about me. I think it's just about, wanting it very much, like it just... Sure. You definitely need to love it and need to want it and need to perhaps overcome different barriers that if you weren't a woman you wouldn't have, especially in Latin America. Let's not lie about it. Still very sexist culture overall in Latin America, and that's not privy to aviation. It's overall. So yeah, I've heard or pretend not to hear things that I heard. I pretend not to see things that I've seen, but sometimes, did speak up about it. But I think for sure, nobody would be, I wouldn't have gotten to the place I am with the people that have supported me and aided me and, allowed me to be where I am throughout these 20 years that I have. And, they were all men, to be honest with you, they were all men. Like if I name names, they're all going to be men. And it's okay, but they were men that gave me the space, lift me up, or were hand in hand with me, had the patience, had the will, to let this girl, because at one time I had, you're this girl coming from Brazil, I had a lot of that, and I don't mean that. I think I have good genes. I think I have good skin. I don't know, I don't call it. I'm still young, but I never. To me, to some extent, everywhere I went and the beliefs, I think the belief that I have, the values and what I wanted to do, I was a professional in Latin America, I could have been, a man, a girl, green, white, black, it doesn't matter, the color or the color of my hair or, it was just about, I had to prove a lot, definitely. I had to prove people that, this girl, from Latin America, does she know what she's talking about? So yes, I had to prove myself, consistently, day in and day out, inside my own companies and outside of my own companies, right? But I also had I think the benefit of having people alongside with me, mentors and bosses and peers, that, gave me the opportunity to say, okay, she can do it, right? And I knew I could do it. Like, I remember, like I said, guys, like, I don't know how to do this, but I will do it. I think I had that driving me that I wanted, not for anybody, but just for myself. I just want to say, like, I know I can do it. So, and I want to do it. So I think you do have to be hungry, for sure. And again, and being hungry, it's not being a woman or a man. You got to be hungry because you want, you like what you're doing and you want to go places and you want to, absorb more, challenges and experiences. So I think I had that in me, but I think acknowledging and, seeing like who are the people that can help you get there. I think that's definitely a wise thing one has to think about. It's because you don't get any place by yourself. It's a team effort, and and there's, so you do have to appreciate, the people and the places where, wow, there's room for me to grow here, and they're going to let me do it, right? Like I have people that support me in that trajectory, right? And I'm forever thankful, for my time that I had at Bash and Rameh, the time and the people that, I got to work with at Azul, and it's going to be a gigantic list of names, right? And the same at GCAS, and then the same at Allegiant, and the same at Macquarie, right? You only, you're part of a team, you're a piece of a puzzle. So I think the people, that, as I said, I think I began this podcast talking about people. It's, places I've worked, it was because the people, full circle, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty much, the people that I worked around with. And I'm still, I think, in most circumstances, pleased to call them friends and colleagues up until today. And, and the one thing I'll say is that, hopefully I'll have many more along the way. It's been 20 years, but it's been only 20 years the same way. Like you guys, like we haven't, to be honest with you, I think after this conversation here, I want to be able to do more with you guys and get to know us better and see how we can collaborate and work together. If that being bringing more women to the podcast or bringing more Latin people to the podcast, I'll definitely, do it because, again, hopefully I can do it and I want to do it. I'm hungry for that.
Challenge accepted.
So
it feels the next step.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking, I think, before we started recording, just so ISTAT, right? A lot more female representation, women representation at ISTAT today than 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But what the next step just kind of feels to be, okay, great, stand up and be heard. Like, we're literally doing a podcast. Like, look, the only reason we're doing this is because we were stupid enough to do it. Right? We're just the loud ones in the room, but that doesn't mean we're just trying to fill dead air. Stand up, like, please. Yes, absolutely. Here's a mic. That's what you do so well, by the way, Priscilla. I mean, that's why we love you. But that's why you're so respected in the industry. Is because you're certainly not afraid to share what you think, and you also happen to be really good at what you do too. So there's that.
Nah, come on, thanks. But I think I'll say that. I think word of advice for women getting into the business: don't be shy. Don't be shy. As Godspeed what you said. Stand up. Say what you think. Don't, because you're a woman, doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man. If you do believe you have something to say, or if you're like, I don't agree with this, say, I don't agree with this. I think we could do it this differently. Say it, speak up, because, it's, don't be shy. Just because you're a woman, don't feel less represented or don't feel less worthy, because, it should be. And I think it more and more is becoming about, how good you are, or how good you know something, or what's the angle that you have, or the intention that you have, then how you look. You can look like a girl, and it can be short. You can be have an accent, Latin American accent, but if you know what you're doing and you're sure to do it, speak up, go and do it. Don't be shy. Yeah. That's women have a tendency sometimes to be a little bit shy. Oh, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to be quiet because I maybe I don't know what I'm saying. Do have the courage. It's gonna pay off. I promise.
Yeah, that's true.
Look, and you can make a fool of yourself and still end up okay. We are literally living proof of
this. And still end up having your own podcast. Yeah, but it's it's true, and I think what's important is when you like you always have to tell if you have something to say or a question or like say it, because 9 times out of 10 there's other people in that room that are thinking the exact same thing and they don't say it, right? And if you say it, then they're like, oh, you know what, you're right. And at the end of the day, what drives me is I love hearing interesting things from interesting people, right? So if you don't say anything, how are you supposed to know, right? How are you going to know? But it's that's what drives this industry, is getting people's views, regardless of whether they agree with somebody else or not, right? Because at the end of the day, that's how we learn.
I agree. Again, obviously, I'm saying all of this, but you do have to have, back to the environment you're working with and the people you're working with. Yeah. You do have to have an environment that allows you to do that embraces that. Because sometimes some cultures may not, and it's nothing wrong with you. Maybe it's something wrong with that culture. So hopefully, I think, more and more, people in leading roles that would embrace people speaking up and hearing with somebody that may be perceived as young or maybe has something to say. I think those type of cultures and companies that have, and they can be airlines, they can be leasing companies, they can be financiers, they can be handling companies, doesn't matter. But, companies that have that culture definitely will tend to strive more than others that do not. I personally believe that. So I think, you need to be able to talk, but, be in a place that allows you to do so.
Absolutely. Well said. Yep. Well and said. On that note, I think we're gonna wrap it up. But it's been an absolute pleasure. It was great to meet you in Dublin for the first time when you came up and said, "Hey, I love you guys' podcast." I was like, "Great," and I'm glad that we reached out and got you on, because this was fantastic, and we certainly appreciate your thoughts on kind of what's in your heart and what you're doing every day. So it was a pleasure to speak with you.
No, thank you very much, guys, and my pleasure as well. And let's find an excuse for you guys to come down, to Brazil, São Paulo, Latin America. Wherever.
We don't need excuses. It's just the time is really it. But
I'm a member of ISTAT, Latin America committee for a few years now. And to your point about women in ISTAT and what Mary is doing,
there you go.
A lot of praise to Mary Friedman as well. And we're going to have ISTAT Latin America in September. So you're more than invited to come down. I'll make sure that try to kind of bring you guys down here to Latin America and see what we have that, as again, you said, special and, about the passion and, the fullness of the experience of Latin America.
And let's not forget about the food. The food is great. The food is great too.
Let's not even start talking about the food. Yeah.
I mean, just like everywhere else, just more so.
Yeah.
The barbecue and the beef and, Jesus, like it's for another podcast.
That's right. The cachaça and the caipirinhas, right?
Oh, yeah.
No, come on, Gary. You know better. Come on. So let's
yeah. Priscilla, thank you again.
No, thank you, guys. Take care and hope to see you soon in person. Okay?
Absolutely.
Yes, we will.
I start us off, and then I can't get Courtney to stop talking, but that's okay.
Right to roll. And dancing different tunes. What's I'm glad it doesn't bring my dogs, but
yeah, it had a Connecticut accent.